Let's get one thing straight from the jump. We're not here to talk about a drummer. That word is too small, too pedestrian for the subject at hand. A drummer keeps time. A drummer lays down a beat for other people to sing and play over. A drummer is, in the grand and often cruel hierarchy of the rock and roll band, the guy at the back, the one you can barely see, the one whose name you probably don't know. We're here to talk about a force of nature, a human hurricane strapped to a contraption of gleaming steel and stretched animal hide. A man who didn't just play the drums but wrestled them, tamed them, and forced them to speak a language no one had ever heard before. We are here to talk about PALMER, the percussive heart, the relentless engine, and the architectural backbone of that glorious, maddening, and utterly unapologetic beast that was Emerson, Lake, and Palmer. To even begin to understand his genius, you have to perform a bit of mental surgery. You have to locate the part of your brain that holds the definition of what a rock drummer is supposed to do, and you have to remove it with a rusty spoon, because a drummer's job is to keep time, to provide a foundation, to be the steady, reliable pulse behind the flashy guys up front. That's the job description handed down from the Mount Sinai of rock and roll. PALMER saw that job description, laughed a hearty, full-throated laugh, set it on fire with a Zippo lighter, and then used the smouldering ashes to sketch out a new set of architectural blueprints for his instrument. His blueprint didn't describe a timekeeper. It described a co-conspirator, a lead instrumentalist, and a one-man orchestral percussion section, all rolled into one impossibly energetic, technically terrifying package. His genius wasn't just about hitting things hard and fast, though good Lord he could do that faster, harder, and with more precision than almost anyone who has ever picked up a pair of sticks. His genius was in the transubstantiation of his instrument. He took an instrument of pure rhythm and transformed it into an instrument of melody, of drama, of tension and release, of sheer narrative power. In the grandiloquent theater of ELP, he was the thunder, he was the lightning, and he was the intricate, terrifyingly precise clockwork ticking inside the heart of the storm. To really get a grip on the seismic shockwave that Palmer's arrival represented, you have to tune your mental radio back to the world he exploded into. The late 1960s were a golden age for rock drumming, an era of unprecedented innovation, but it was a different universe of thought. You had the gods, of course, the Mount Rushmore of the beat. In Liverpool, you had Ringo Starr, an absolute master of playing for the song, a man whose genius was so subtle that for years fools debated whether he was even any good. Ringo was brilliant not for the notes he played, but for the inimitable feel he created, the way he would hang on a beat just a fraction of a second longer, the quirky, off-kilter fills that became melodic hooks in their own right. Listen to the sloshy, off-center swagger of Come Together, or the tumbling tom-heavy fills in A Day in the Life. He was the perfect idiosyncratic heartbeat for the Beatles, a model of taste, economy, and musicality. He was the foundation, solid, but with a charming human lean. Then you had the agents of chaos. In London there was Keith Moon of The Who, a human firework display who treated his drum kit less like an instrument and more like a set of provocations. He didn't play beats in the traditional sense, he played explosions. His style was a constant tumbling, crashing wave of snare rolls, cymbal splashes, and bass drum bombs, a joyous, barely contained chaos that perfectly mirrored Pete Townshend's windmilling guitar chords and smashing amplifiers. He was playing lead drums, commenting on the vocal, answering the guitar, a constant manic chatter. He was pure, untamed ID. But to paint this era as purely visceral is a profound disservice to the technical giants already walking the earth. Consider Ginger Baker of Cream. To label him as simply a powerhouse is to miss the point entirely. Baker wasn't just hitting hard, he was a deep thinker, a student of the instrument who had studied with the great British jazz drummer Phil Seaman. He brought a jazzman's brain and a scholar's appreciation for African polyrhythms to the rock stage. He was the one who pioneered the use of two bass drums in a rock context, not for sheer speed, but for creating complex, layered rhythmic patterns that ebbed and flowed like a powerful tide. Listening to Toad isn't just hearing a rock solo, it's hearing a dialogue between different rhythmic traditions, a fusion of power and intellect. Then there was Mitch Mitchell of the Jimi Hendrix Experience. Here was another deep-seated jazz player, thrust into the psychedelic hurricane of Hendrix's guitar. Mitchell didn't play a beat for Hendrix, He played with Hendrix. His style was fluid, conversational, a constant stream of ghost notes on the snare, intricate cymbal work, and explosive free-form fills that danced around the guitar and bass. He was the embodiment of jazz freedom in a rock setting, a different kind of virtuosity, based on improvisation and empathy. And, of course, there was the man who would become the benchmark for power, John Bonham of Led Zeppelin. Bonham was the god of thunder, plain and simple. He played with a weight and a groove that felt tectonic, as if he were summoning the rhythm from the very core of the earth. His sound was massive, a cannon shot in a cathedral. He was the undisputed king of the groove, the master of making simple beats feel impossibly heavy and soulful. So the world Palmer entered was not devoid of technique. It was teeming with it. But Palmer's brand of virtuosity was different. While Baker was fusing rock with African and jazz sensibilities, and Mitchell was a free jazz spirit in a rock body, Palmer came from another direction entirely. He arrived like an emissary from a different, more disciplined planet, an alien who had studied humanity's popular music and decided it needed a serious upgrade in terms of orchestral ambition and clinical precision. His heroes weren't just the rock guys. They were men like Gene Krupa and Buddy Rich. To the uninitiated, those might just be names from your grandfather's record collection, but to drummers, they are gods of a different pantheon. Gene Krupa was the man who made the drummer a star, a showman who brought the drums into the spotlight. Buddy Rich was technique personified, a man whose speed, power, and control were and remain almost supernatural. Palmer absorbed this. He saw that the drummer could be a soloist, a star, a technical marvel. But then he added the crucial differentiating ingredient. He sought out and studied with one of the most respected classical percussionists in Britain, the great James Blades. This cannot be overstated. This was an immersion in a completely different musical philosophy. Classical percussion is about discipline, reading complex scores, and understanding the vast spectrum of dynamics. It's about learning the timpani, the xylophone, the marimba, the tubular bells, the gong. It's about understanding that your role is to provide color, texture, and dramatic punctuation within a 100-piece orchestra. This was Palmer's unique synthesis, the showmanship of a big band leader, the raw power of a rock drummer, and the disciplined mind of a classical percussionist. He wasn't just another flavor of rock drummer, he was a new species. Before he became the P in the prog rock monolith of ELP, Palmer had already been honing his craft and building his reputation in bands that hinted at the glorious madness to come. With The Crazy World of Arthur Brown, he was the engine behind their massive psychedelic hit Fire, a piece of pure rock and roll theater. His drumming on that track is frantic, powerful, and relentless, driving the song's demented energy forward. After that, he co-founded Atomic Rooster, a band that delved into a heavier, darker, more complex sound, a true prototype of what would become progressive hard rock. Here, you can hear his style beginning to truly form. He's not just keeping time, he's playing intricate patterns using his full kit, pushing the music into more complex territories. These were his training grounds, his dojos, where he sharpened his sticks and built up the sheer muscularity and technical facility that would soon be required of him. But these were still, in a recognizable sense, rock bands. The real Big Bang, the singularity event that would tear the envelope to shreds, happened in 1970. The story is now the stuff of legend. Keith Emerson, a keyboard wizard of astonishing ability, and Greg Lake, the golden-voiced bassist from the first seminal lineup of King Crimson, decided to form a band. They needed a drummer who could not only keep up, but could actively contribute and push them even further. They found Carl Palmer. It wasn't just a click, it was a nuclear fusion. The very concept of Emerson, Lake, and Palmer was an act of supreme, almost laughable arrogance. And you must understand that this is not an insult. In the world of prog rock, it is the highest possible compliment. In an era still dominated by the 3-minute pop single, they dared to create music on a symphonic scale. They fused the raw power of rock with the structural complexity of classical music and the improvisational freedom of jazz. And in this trio of giants, Palmer was not the rhythmic foundation. He was an equal partner, a third lead instrument. You had Emerson, the mad scientist, wrestling with a towering monolith of keyboards. You had Lake, the stoic anchor, his voice a pure clarion call. And then you had Palmer enthroned behind a drum kit that looked less like a musical instrument and more like the command console of an intergalactic starship. It was a partnership of 3 soloists, and it only worked because each man was an absolute monster on his chosen instrument. To truly get a handle on what Palmer was actually doing, let's take a journey into their 1971 masterpiece, Tarkus. The title track is a 20-minute epic about a mythical armadillo tank. It opens with a jarring, lurching riff from Emerson's Hammond organ. Immediately, you can't tap your foot to it. That's because it's in an odd time signature, specifically 10/8. To a layperson, it means the comfortable, head-nodding pulse is gone, replaced by something lurching and mechanical. For the technically minded, it's 10/8 notes crammed into a measure, but they are grouped into uneven pulses, like 3 plus plow 2 plow 2, completely destroying any sense of a simple 1 2 3 4 and creating a feeling of powerful mechanical imbalance. This is the sound of the monster, Tarkus, clanking to life. And what is Palmer doing? He is articulating the monster's every move. His snare drum cracks like a whip. His double bass drums thunder in perfect unison with the riff. He navigates this bizarre, lopsided rhythm not with difficulty, but with a ferocious, joyful precision. Throughout the epic, the time signatures shift constantly, and Palmer is the navigator. He doesn't just follow Emerson, he engages him in a high-speed dogfight. Emerson unleashes a torrent of notes, and Palmer responds instantly with a fill that isn't just a simple roll. It's a complex, syncopated phrase that directly comments on the keyboard part, a rhythmic counter-melody. This was revolutionary. His four-limb independence was staggering, a dazzling display of both raw athleticism and profound musical intelligence. Then there was the sound. Palmer famously commissioned a custom-built kit made of stainless steel. It looked magnificent, but it was a sonic choice. The steel shells gave his drums a brighter, louder, more cutting attack that could slice through the dense wall of sound created by Emerson and Lake. He surrounded himself with an arsenal of percussion, massive gongs, timpani for dramatic rolls, tubular bells. He was an orchestral percussionist in a rock context. And this is where we must address his use of two bass drums. Now he wasn't the first to bring them to a rock stage. The mighty Ginger Baker had already done that, and jazz legend Louis Bellson had pioneered it decades earlier. But Palmer repurposed the technique. For him, it wasn't just for texture or power. It was for the relentless machine gun-like speed and precision that Emerson's complex bass pedal lines demanded. He perfected its use as a tool for high-velocity, intricate patterns that would become a hallmark of progressive rock and metal drumming. And he was a showman. His drum solos were centerpiece events, featuring rotating drum risers and theatrical flair. Perhaps the most forward-thinking moment in his career came on the 1973 album Brain Salad Surgery, on the track Toccata, an adaptation of a violent piano concerto by Alberto Ginastera. During Palmer's solo, you hear otherworldly electronic zaps and bleeps. This was something entirely new. Palmer had developed a revolutionary system where his acoustic drums were fitted with electronic triggers connected to a Moog synthesizer. Every time he struck a drum, it would produce its own acoustic sound and generate a synthesized one. This was 1973. He was, in effect, playing the synthesizer with his drums, years before electronic kits and sampling became commonplace. He was a true pioneer, a sonic explorer. Of course, this level of bombast did not go unnoticed, and it wasn't universally loved. By the mid to late 1970s, punk rock emerged as a violent reaction against what was perceived as the self-indulgence of dinosaur rock. It's a simple and dramatic narrative to say punk killed prog, but the reality is more nuanced. A weariness with complexity was already setting in, seen in the back-to-basics honesty of the pub rock scene in the UK and the rise of simpler arena rock. Punk was simply the most visible and aggressive manifestation of this sentiment, and bands like ELP, with their 20-minute songs and massive stage shows, were the perfect effigy to burn. The critics, who championed this new simplicity, were often savage, but what they often missed was the sheer, unadulterated joy in the performance. They mistook ambition for pretension. Carl Palmer wasn't playing in 13/8 just to show off. He was playing it because that was the language the music demanded. The epic, cinematic scope of the compositions required a drummer who could think like a composer. A simple 4/4 beat would have been a profound betrayal of the music's spirit. The legacy of Carl Palmer is therefore immense. He was the idea that the drummer could be a star. But to understand his place in history, you must also look at the other giant of the era, Bill Bruford of Yes and King Crimson. If Palmer was a boxer, all power, precision, and overwhelming attack, Bruford was a fencer. His style was built on a jazz sensibility, a crisp and dry snare sound that was instantly recognizable, and a mastery of polyrhythm and rhythmic displacement that was more about subtle tension and intellectual elegance than brute force. Palmer was the orchestral powerhouse. Bruford was the intricate polyrhythmic logician. Together, these two men established the two main schools of thought for progressive rock drumming, creating the twin pillars upon which everything that followed was built. Future titans like Neil Peart of Rush and Mike Portnoy of Dream Theater are the children of this lineage. You can hear Palmer's power, speed, and showmanship in their playing, but you can also hear Bruford's precision, complexity, and compositional approach. They drew from both wells. So, why does any of this still matter? We listen because it is gloriously, passionately, and unapologetically human. In the playing of Carl Palmer, you hear the sound of a human being pushing the absolute limits of their physical and mental capabilities. You hear the sweat, the effort, the thousands of hours of disciplined practice culminating in a performance of breathtaking power and mind-bending complexity. It's not always neat, it's loud, and it's almost always over the top, but it is thrillingly, dangerously alive. Carl Palmer's genius was a genius of translation. He translated the complex language of classical and jazz percussion into the raw, amplified vernacular of rock and roll. He took the cold, hard mathematics of complex time signatures and imbued them with fire and passion. He was never the grooviest drummer. That crown belongs to others. But he was, without a shadow of a doubt, one of the most powerful, intelligent, and daring musicians to ever sit behind a drum kit. Along with his brilliant contemporary Bill Bruford, he wrote the book on progressive drumming, forcing the world to see the drummer not just as the pulse, but as the fiery, articulate, and relentlessly beating heart. And that is a rhythm that will never, ever fade away.